fragments refuse obedience, while accepted timelines quietly unravel. Every impossible relic carries silent defiance against everything confidently taught. Minds instinctively reject contradictions until overwhelming patterns begin emerging. Ancient anomalies remain stubborn, elegant, untamed, inviting relentless investigation. Continue watching carefully. Disbelief gradually transforms into unsettling fascination without revealing the ultimate truth. A pale sun hangs low above the horizon, its light weak and strangely colorless. Even at midday, the sky seems wrapped in a thin gray veil, muting the landscape beneath it. Forests appear lifeless. Rivers reflect a dull metallic glow instead of bright daylight. Crops struggle to grow, and distant mountains disappear behind an unnatural haze that refuses to lift. For those living during the year 536, this was not a passing storm or an ordinary season. It was the beginning of one of history's most extraordinary environmental disasters. Across Europe, the Middle East, and much of Asia, chroniclers recorded remarkably similar observations. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, resembling the moon throughout the year. Roman official Cassiodorus described skies that remained dim for months, while Chinese records reported unusual frosts, failed harvests, and widespread famine. These accounts emerged independently, separated by thousands of miles, yet they seem to describe the same haunting phenomenon. For centuries, historians struggled to understand what these witnesses had experienced. Was the darkness merely symbolic language, shaped by religious fears and political uncertainty, or had an event of astonishing scale truly altered Earth's atmosphere? Modern science has provided a compelling explanation. Ice cores extracted from Greenland and Antarctica contain microscopic volcanic ash and unusually high concentrations of sulfur, dating to around AD 536. Tree rings from Europe, North America, and Asia reveal dramatically reduced growth during the same period, indicating years of unusually cold temperatures. Together, these discoveries suggest that one, or perhaps several, massive volcanic eruptions injected enormous quantities of sulfur-rich aerosols into the upper atmosphere, reflecting sunlight back into space and cooling the planet. Yet certainty remains elusive. The greatest mystery is not whether volcanic activity occurred, but where it began. Several candidates have been proposed. Some researchers point toward Iceland, whose volcanic systems are capable of producing immense ash clouds. Others suggest a tropical eruption, arguing that volcanoes near the equator can spread aerosols across both hemispheres more effectively. Additional evidence hints that multiple eruptions, occurring within a relatively short period, may have prolonged the climatic crisis. Even the exact sequence remains debated. The environmental consequences were profound. Crop failures triggered food shortages across continents. Weakened populations became more vulnerable to disease. Just a few years later, the Justinian plague spread across the Byzantine Empire, becoming one of the deadliest pandemics of the ancient world. Some historians view these events as interconnected, suggesting that climate disruption created conditions favorable for social instability, migration, and epidemic disease. Others urge caution, warning that complex historical transformations rarely stem from a single cause. Beyond scientific investigation, the volcanic winter has inspired more speculative interpretations. Ancient traditions from various cultures describe years of darkness, failing harvests, and skies that seemed permanently altered. Some have wondered whether these stories preserve distant memories of the same catastrophe. Others point to legends describing divine punishment, celestial battles, or cosmic omens, suggesting that extraordinary natural events were woven into mythology long before written explanations became possible. There are also theories that an impact from a comet or fragments of an asteroid contributed to the atmospheric veil, though most available geological evidence continues to favor volcanic activity. Still, isolated discoveries occasionally revive the debate, reminding researchers that Earth's past often resists simple narratives. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of AD 536 is how completely it transformed everyday life without leaving behind monumental ruins or dramatic battlefields. Instead, its fingerprints linger quietly inside ice, wood, and forgotten manuscripts, silent records of a world suddenly plunged into shadow. The haze eventually lifted, but the questions never fully disappeared. What volcano truly ignited this global winter, and could its full story still be waiting, locked beneath glaciers or hidden within landscapes that have yet to reveal their oldest secrets? As the mysterious skies of AD 536 gradually cleared, another shadow settled across the historical record. Not one cast by volcanic ash, but by silence. In that silence, a single name refused to disappear: Arthur. Morning mist drifts across the rolling hills of western Britain, where ruined stone fortresses overlook quiet valleys and windswept moors. Broken walls rise from the earth like unfinished memories, their weathered stones bearing witness to centuries of conflict, abandonment, and forgotten lives. Somewhere among these landscapes, according to generations of storytellers, a warrior king once united fractured kingdoms against invading forces. Yet, despite centuries of searching, no grave, palace, or unmistakable inscription has ever confirmed that King Arthur truly existed. The earliest centuries following the collapse of Roman Britain remain among the least understood periods in European history. Written records became scarce, political authority fragmented, and much of daily life slipped beyond the reach of surviving documents. It is within this uncertain era, sometime during the late 5th or early 6th century, that Arthur is traditionally placed. Curiously, the earliest surviving accounts do not describe him as a crowned king at all. Instead, texts such as the Historia Brittonum, compiled centuries after the events it claims to describe, portray Arthur as a military leader who fought a series of victorious battles against the Saxons. Later sources expanded these brief references into increasingly elaborate narratives, introducing Camelot, Merlin, the Round Table, and the legendary sword Excalibur. With each generation, history and imagination became more tightly woven together. But where does one end and the other begin? Many historians suggest that Arthur may represent not one individual, but a composite figure assembled from several real war leaders who resisted the Anglo-Saxon advance. In a period marked by regional kingdoms and shifting alliances, successful commanders could easily become merged through oral tradition until separate identities formed a single heroic legend. Others believe Arthur may have been inspired by an actual historical figure whose achievements were later transformed through centuries of storytelling. Several candidates have been proposed. Roman military officers, British kings, and local rulers have all been suggested, each supported by fragments of evidence, yet contradicted by equally persuasive objections. None has gained universal acceptance. Then there is the enduring mystery of Camelot itself. Dozens of archaeological sites have been linked to the legendary court. Cadbury Castle in Somerset revealed evidence of major fortification during the very period traditionally associated with Arthur. Tintagel, perched dramatically above the Cornish coast, produced artifacts indicating high-status occupation during the 5th and 6th centuries, challenging earlier assumptions that Britain had entered complete decline after Rome's withdrawal. These discoveries demonstrate that powerful centers still existed. Whether any belonged to Arthur remains another matter entirely. Even Arthur's disappearance remains elusive. According to medieval tradition, he was mortally wounded during the Battle of Camlan and carried to the island of Avalon, where he did not truly die but entered a mysterious sleep, destined to return when Britain needed him most. The tale echoes older Celtic traditions in which heroic figures pass beyond ordinary death into hidden realms lying just beyond human perception. Some researchers interpret Avalon as a symbolic afterlife. Others have proposed real locations, including Glastonbury, where medieval monks famously claimed to uncover Arthur's grave during the 12th century. The discovery attracted pilgrims and royal attention, yet many modern scholars suspect the announcement served political and financial purposes rather than historical truth. Perhaps the greatest reason Arthur continues to endure is that the evidence never fully settles the question. Every archaeological discovery seems to illuminate one possibility while casting another into deeper uncertainty. Every manuscript preserves valuable clues while raising fresh doubts about authorship, chronology, and memory. In the end, Arthur occupies a rare place where history, folklore, archaeology, and national identity intersect. Whether he was a single ruler, several forgotten leaders, or an enduring symbol born from an age of upheaval, his disappearance remains one of history's most compelling anomalies. Somewhere between ruined fortresses, fading manuscripts, and whispered legends, the boundary between fact and memory grows remarkably thin. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether Arthur vanished, but whether history has been searching for the wrong man all along. If King Arthur lingers in history as a figure obscured by legend, the next mystery leaves behind something far more tangible: empty streets, abandoned homes, and graves that multiplied faster than memory could preserve their names. Here, the question is not whether the catastrophe happened, but why it became so devastating. The bustling harbors of Constantinople awaken beneath the first light of dawn. Merchant ships crowd the docks, their hulls heavy with grain, spices, silk, and countless unseen passengers. Rats dart between stacked cargo, disappearing into narrow alleys before anyone notices. Markets fill with voices from every corner of the Mediterranean, while church bells echo across marble streets. At first glance, the empire appears prosperous, confident, and secure. Yet, hidden within this thriving crossroads, an invisible force is already beginning its silent journey. In AD 541, reports emerged from the Egyptian port of Pelusium, describing a deadly illness unlike anything living generations had witnessed. Within months, it spread along trade routes into Palestine, North Africa, Asia Minor, and eventually Constantinople itself. By the spring of AD 542, the imperial capital had become the center of one of history's earliest recorded pandemics. The Byzantine historian Procopius described streets overwhelmed by the dead, businesses abandoned, and entire households erased within days. Emperor Justinian himself reportedly contracted the illness but survived, giving the pandemic the name by which it is remembered today. For ordinary citizens, survival often depended not on medicine, but on chance. For centuries, historians debated the disease responsible for this catastrophe. Contemporary descriptions mention swollen lymph nodes, sudden fever, delirium, and rapid death, leading many to suspect bubonic plague. Yet, without biological evidence, certainty remained impossible. Were ancient writers accurately describing symptoms, or interpreting them through the limited medical understanding of their age? In recent decades, scientific discoveries have transformed the discussion. DNA recovered from human remains buried during the pandemic has revealed traces of Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death nearly 8 centuries later. This finding strongly supports the conclusion that Justinian's plague was indeed an early outbreak of bubonic plague. Yet, identifying the pathogen has not solved the larger mystery. Why did the disease emerge when it did? Why did it spread with such astonishing speed? And why did its consequences appear so severe? One increasingly influential theory looks beyond the bacterium itself and toward the changing environment of the 6th century. Only a few years earlier, the mysterious volcanic winter of AD 536 had plunged much of the northern hemisphere into unusually cold conditions. Crop failures, famine, and economic disruption followed across vast regions. Some researchers believe weakened populations became more vulnerable to infectious disease, while shifting climates altered rodent habitats, encouraging plague-carrying animals to move into new territories. Trade may also have played a decisive role. The Byzantine Empire maintained one of the most extensive commercial networks of the ancient world. Grain shipments from Egypt, merchant caravans from Asia, and constant maritime traffic connected distant populations with remarkable efficiency. These same routes that carried wealth and knowledge may also have transported infected rodents and fleas across continents. Still, not every historian agrees on the scale of the disaster. Some argue that medieval chroniclers exaggerated mortality, influenced by fear, religious interpretation, or literary tradition. Archaeological evidence from certain regions appears less dramatic than written accounts suggest, leading to ongoing debates about how many people truly perished and whether the empire's decline can be attributed primarily to the plague. Others wonder whether additional diseases accompanied Yersinia pestis, creating overlapping outbreaks that ancient observers could not distinguish. Environmental stress, malnutrition, political instability, and recurring epidemics may have combined into a crisis far more complex than any single explanation allows. The origins of the pandemic remain equally uncertain. Genetic studies suggest the bacterium may have circulated for centuries before erupting into global prominence. Somewhere, perhaps in Central Asia or another still undetermined region, ecological conditions shifted just enough to transform a localized disease into an event that reshaped civilizations. The Justinian plague reminds us that history is not always altered by armies or emperors. Sometimes, the smallest organisms leave the deepest marks, moving silently through crowded harbors and forgotten villages alike. As the echoes of the Justinian plague fade into the background of history, another mystery quietly returns, one that has survived not through bones or bacteria, but through names, fragments of manuscripts and legends repeated for nearly 15 centuries. If Arthur truly existed, then one question remains more elusive than all the rest. Who was he? A lonely hilltop fortress rises above the mist, its weathered stone walls overlooking valleys shaped by centuries of wind and rain. Ravens circle overhead as narrow paths disappear into the surrounding countryside. The silence is broken only by the sound of distant streams and the occasional gust moving through ancient grass. Places like these are scattered across Britain, each carrying whispers of forgotten rulers whose stories were never fully written down. Somewhere among them, many believe, lived the man who inspired the legend of King Arthur. The period following Rome's withdrawal from Britain in the early 5th century remains one of the most obscure chapters in European history. Written records are rare, archaeological evidence is often incomplete, and local kingdoms rose and fell with remarkable speed. Into this uncertain landscape emerged stories of a warrior whose victories briefly united divided peoples against invading Saxon forces. Yet no contemporary document clearly identifies such a king. The earliest references to Arthur appear generations after the events they describe. The Historia Brittonum, traditionally attributed to Nennius in the 9th century, presents Arthur as a military commander responsible for 12 victorious battles. The Annales Cambriae, compiled later, records the Battle of Badon and the Battle of Camlan, where Arthur supposedly met his end. These texts offer tantalizing clues, but they were written centuries after the lifetime of the man they describe. leaving historians to ask how much reflects history and how much reflects tradition. As a result, scholars have searched for Arthur beneath many different names. One frequently discussed candidate is Ambrosius Aurelianus, a Romano-British leader praised by the 6th century writer Gildas for resisting Saxon expansion. Unlike Arthur, Ambrosius appears in sources closer to the events themselves. Some researchers suggest later storytellers may have transferred his achievements to a more legendary figure, gradually transforming memory into myth. Others point toward Riathamus, a 5th century British ruler who led military campaigns in Gaul. Medieval records describe him as a king whose career ended in mysterious circumstances after a devastating defeat. Intriguingly, the name Riathamus may not have been a personal name at all, but a title meaning High King. Could later generations have remembered fragments of his story while forgetting the man himself? Another possibility centers on Owain Dantgwyn, or Arthwis ap Mar, regional rulers whose names and territories overlap with traditions associated with Arthur. Although the evidence remains circumstantial, these figures illustrate how numerous local leaders may have contributed pieces to an evolving legend. Then there is the possibility that no single individual can explain Arthur at all. Some historians argue the legendary king emerged from centuries of oral storytelling, combining the victories, personalities, and reputations of multiple war leaders into one unforgettable hero. In societies where stories were passed from generation to generation before being written down, separate lives could easily merge into a single narrative. Heroic deeds expanded, locations shifted, and symbolic meanings grew until history became inseparable from folklore. Archaeology offers fascinating hints without definitive answers. Excavations at Tintagel have uncovered evidence of an important elite settlement during the late 5th and 6th centuries, demonstrating that influential rulers occupied the region once dismissed as culturally isolated. Cadbury Castle also reveals signs of extensive fortification from roughly the same era. Neither site proves Arthur lived there, yet both remind us that the historical landscape behind the legend was far more complex than once believed. More speculative theories venture even further. Some suggest Arthur's story preserves echoes of older Celtic deities transformed into human heroes. Others see connections to astronomical symbolism or ancient seasonal myths, where the king represents cycles of death and renewal rather than an actual ruler. These interpretations remain highly debated, yet they demonstrate the remarkable reach of Arthur's legacy across cultures and centuries. If the identity of King Arthur remains hidden behind fragmented chronicles, the next mystery leaves behind something more tangible, or perhaps more elusive. Not a forgotten ruler, but a fortune said to have crossed continents, survived collapsing empires, and then disappeared without leaving a single confirmed trace. The dry hills of central Spain glow beneath the evening sun, their rocky slopes interrupted by abandoned watchtowers, ancient roads, and weathered ruins that have overlooked the landscape for centuries. Beneath layers of earth lie remnants of kingdoms that rose, flourished, and fell, often carrying their greatest possessions into obscurity. Somewhere among these valleys, according to one of Europe's oldest legends, rests the lost treasure of the Visigoths. The story begins far from the Iberian Peninsula. In AD 410, the Visigoths, led by King Alaric, entered Rome in an event that shocked the ancient world. Although the city had endured political decline for decades, the sack of Rome carried enormous symbolic weight. Contemporary accounts describe precious metals, religious objects, jeweled ornaments, and imperial wealth being taken as spoils. Among the most enduring traditions is the claim that sacred treasures originally removed from the temple in Jerusalem, centuries earlier, may have been carried away as part of this immense collection. While historians continue to debate the exact inventory of what was taken, there is little doubt that the Visigoths acquired extraordinary riches during their campaigns. Over the following generations, these treasures accompanied the Visigoths as they established a kingdom stretching across parts of Gaul before eventually consolidating their rule in Hispania. Their capital at Toledo became one of the most important political and religious centers in Western Europe. Royal courts displayed remarkable wealth, while churches accumulated priceless ceremonial objects crafted from gold, silver, and precious gemstones. Then, in AD 711, everything changed. The Umayyad invasion of the Iberian Peninsula unfolded with astonishing speed. After the defeat of King Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete, the Visigothic kingdom rapidly collapsed. Cities surrendered, royal authority fragmented, and surviving nobles fled in different directions. Amid the chaos, chroniclers began describing something else that disappeared alongside the kingdom itself: the royal treasury. What exactly vanished remains uncertain. Some medieval accounts speak of wagon loads of gold hidden before advancing armies arrived. Others mention sacred crowns, jeweled crosses, royal regalia, and ceremonial vessels concealed inside monasteries, mountain caves, or remote fortresses. Over time, these stories expanded, suggesting that the accumulated wealth of generations had simply dissolved into the landscape. Archaeology has occasionally added remarkable pieces to the puzzle. In 1858, workers near Guarazar, not far from Toledo, uncovered an extraordinary collection of jeweled votive crowns and crosses buried underground. Crafted from gold and decorated with pearls, sapphires, and other precious stones, the objects demonstrated the astonishing craftsmanship of the Visigothic court. Their discovery proved that valuable treasures had indeed been hidden during periods of political turmoil. Yet, the Guarazar treasure may represent only a fraction of what once existed. Many historians believe additional caches were concealed elsewhere, perhaps by nobles hoping to recover them after the conflict subsided. If so, countless hiding places may never have been recorded, leaving later generations with little more than scattered traditions and vague geographical clues. Some theories suggest the treasures were secretly transported north into the rugged mountains of Asturias, where Christian resistance later emerged. Others propose they were buried beneath ruined villas, sealed inside forgotten mines, or concealed within caves known only to a handful of trusted guardians. More speculative ideas claim the wealth was divided into numerous smaller caches to prevent its capture, making complete recovery nearly impossible, even if individual sites were eventually discovered. As stories of hidden Visigothic treasures fade into silence, another mystery emerges from a very different landscape. Here, there are no legendary vaults or jeweled crowns waiting beneath the earth. Instead, an entire empire seems to dissolve into history itself, leaving behind scattered ruins, unfamiliar coins, and a name whose true identity remains remarkably elusive. The winds sweep across the broad plains of Central Asia, carrying dust over abandoned fortresses and forgotten caravan routes. Snow-covered mountains rise in the distance, while ancient river valleys cut through deserts that once connected east and west. Centuries ago, merchants, diplomats, monks, and conquerors traveled these roads, exchanging silk, spices, languages, and ideas. Among the many powers that controlled these crossroads, one kingdom appeared with astonishing speed, and then almost disappeared from the historical record. The Hephtalites, often called the White Huns in later sources, emerged during the 5th century as one of the most formidable forces in Central Asia. Within only a few generations, they expanded across territories that now include parts of Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and neighboring regions. They defeated powerful rivals, controlled vital trade routes along the Silk Road, and even humbled the mighty Sasanian Persian Empire. Yet, despite ruling a vast domain, remarkably little is known about who they truly were. Unlike neighboring civilizations that left extensive written records, the Hephthalites produced very few surviving texts of their own. Most modern knowledge comes from outsiders: Byzantine historians, Persian chronicles, Chinese travelers, and later Islamic writers. Each described the empire from a different perspective, often using different names and offering conflicting accounts of its customs, language, and origins. Even their ethnicity remains one of history's enduring puzzles. Some historians argue the Hephthalites were an Iranian-speaking people closely connected to local populations already living in Central Asia. Others suggest Turkic roots, while another group of researchers points toward links with earlier nomadic confederations that swept across the Eurasian steppe. There are even theories proposing that the Hephthalites represented a diverse coalition of tribes rather than a single ethnic group, united more by military leadership than shared ancestry. Archaeology has complicated the mystery rather than resolved it. Coins bearing royal portraits have been discovered across former Hephthalite territories, often blending artistic traditions from Persia, India, and Central Asia. Fortified settlements reveal impressive engineering, while luxury goods recovered from excavations demonstrate active participation in long-distance trade. Yet, these discoveries offer only fragments of a civilization whose own voice remains almost entirely absent. The empire reached the height of its power during the late 5th century. In AD 484, the Sasanian king Peroz I launched a major campaign against the Hephthalites, only to suffer a devastating defeat in which he was killed. For years afterward, Persia paid tribute to its former enemies, highlighting the extraordinary strength the Hephthalites had achieved. Then, almost as suddenly as they had risen, they began to disappear. Around the middle of the 6th century, a powerful alliance between the expanding Göktürk Khaganate and the Sasanian Empire struck against the Hephthalites from opposite directions. Their territories were divided, their political authority shattered, and their dominance along the Silk Road came to an abrupt end. But conquest alone may not explain what happened next. Unlike many defeated empires that left identifiable successor states, the Hephthalites seem to fade into surrounding populations with unusual speed. Their royal dynasty disappears. Their language remains uncertain. Their capital has never been conclusively identified. Within only a few generations, references to them become increasingly rare, as though one of Asia's greatest powers simply dissolved into the landscape it once ruled. Some scholars believe the empire fragmented into smaller regional kingdoms that gradually adopted the cultures and identities of neighboring peoples. Others suggest the ruling elite merged with local nobility, leaving subtle genetic and cultural influences rather than obvious political continuity. More speculative theories imagine hidden mountain strongholds where isolated communities preserved fragments of Hephthalite traditions long after the empire's collapse, though convincing evidence has yet to emerge. Perhaps that is what makes the Hephthalites so fascinating. Their victories changed the balance of power across continents, yet their own story survives only in scattered clues left behind by others. Every newly excavated fortress, every coin uncovered beneath ancient soil, and every translated manuscript adds another piece to a puzzle that remains incomplete. Somewhere along the forgotten roads of Central Asia, the missing chapters of the Hephthalite Empire may still lie buried, waiting for history to remember the civilization that almost vanished without a trace. As the Hephthalite Empire faded into the vast landscapes of Central Asia, another powerful people emerged from those same horizons. Their arrival was sudden, their military strength undeniable, yet their beginnings remain among the greatest puzzles of the early medieval world. Before historians can understand where they went, they must first answer a far more difficult question. Where did they come from? The endless grasslands stretch beyond the horizon, where rolling plains meet distant mountain ranges beneath an enormous sky. The wind bends tall grasses in restless waves, leaving no permanent footprints upon the earth. For countless generations, these steppes served as highways rather than barriers, carrying migrating tribes, mounted warriors, merchants, and entire kingdoms across Eurasia. Somewhere within this immense landscape, hidden beyond the reach of surviving records, the story of the Avars begins. When the Avars first appeared in European sources during the middle of the 6th century, they seemed to arrive almost without warning. Byzantine diplomats described an unfamiliar people whose mounted armies moved with remarkable speed and discipline. They demanded tribute, forged shifting alliances, and quickly established themselves as one of the dominant powers of Central Europe. Within decades, the Avar Khaganate controlled vast territories extending across the Carpathian Basin, influencing events from the Balkans to the fringes of Western Europe. Yet, despite their prominence, no one can say with complete confidence who the Avars truly were. The earliest written accounts come almost entirely from outsiders. Byzantine historians recorded negotiations with Avar rulers, while later Frankish and Slavic chronicles described their military campaigns. These sources reveal much about how neighboring civilizations perceived them, but surprisingly little about their own traditions, language, or origins. One long-standing theory suggests the Avars were connected to the Rouran Khaganate, a powerful nomadic empire that dominated parts of Mongolia before being defeated by the rising Gökturks around AD 552. According to several Byzantine writers, refugees fleeing this collapse traveled westward and eventually appeared on Europe's frontier, presenting themselves as the Avars. At first glance, the timeline appears convincing. Yet, the story quickly becomes more complicated. Some historians argue the newcomers who called themselves Avars were not genuine descendants of the Rouran at all. Instead, they may have adopted the prestigious name to strengthen their political authority, much as later rulers throughout history claimed descent from famous dynasties to legitimize their own power. If so, the Avars who entered Europe may have represented an entirely different coalition of tribes united beneath an inherited title. Archaeology has provided fascinating clues while preserving the central mystery. Across Hungary and neighboring regions, excavations have uncovered richly furnished Avar graves containing finely crafted weapons, horse equipment, gold ornaments, and distinctive belt fittings. Burial customs reveal a sophisticated warrior culture with strong steppe traditions, while imported goods demonstrate connections reaching from Byzantium to distant Asia. Yet, these discoveries do not point toward a single homeland. Instead, they reveal influences from multiple regions across Eurasia. Recent genetic research has added another layer to the investigation. DNA recovered from elite Avar burials indicates that at least part of the ruling class possessed ancestry tracing back to northeastern Asia. These findings support the idea that some Avar leaders undertook an extraordinary migration across thousands of kilometers before establishing their new empire in Europe. Even so, important questions remain unanswered. Did this Eastern ancestry represent the entire population, or only a small ruling elite? As the Khaganate expanded, it incorporated Slavic, Germanic, Roman, and other local communities into its territory. Over time, the empire became a mosaic of cultures, making it increasingly difficult to distinguish original Avar identity from the many peoples they governed. More speculative theories venture even further. Some researchers have wondered whether the Avars preserved traditions inherited from earlier steppe empires whose names have been lost to history. Others suggest they represented survivors of several collapsing kingdoms who merged into a new political identity during years of upheaval across Central Asia. Without written records from the Avars themselves, these possibilities remain difficult to evaluate. Perhaps the greatest mystery is how a people capable of reshaping the political landscape of Europe could leave behind so little certainty about their own beginnings. Their fortifications have disappeared, their language remains largely unknown, and even their earliest journey is still debated. Yet, scattered across the plains are silent cemeteries, forgotten settlements, and remarkable artifacts that continue to emerge from the soil. Each discovery brings historians a little closer to understanding the Avar Khaganate, while reminding us that the first chapter of their story may still be waiting somewhere beyond the edge of the written record. From the uncertain origins of the Avars, our journey moves toward a monument whose history is recorded in remarkable detail, yet whose enduring mysteries continue to resist complete explanation. Here, the anomaly is not the disappearance of a people, but the persistence of stories that have echoed beneath one extraordinary dome for nearly 15 centuries. Morning light pours through towering windows, scattering across polished marble in shifting bands of gold. Massive stone columns rise toward an immense dome that appears almost weightless, suspended above the vast interior as though gravity has momentarily surrendered. Every whisper lingers in the air. Every footstep echoes through the enormous chamber, and every surface seems to preserve the memory of countless generations who paused here in silence. This is Hagia Sophia, one of the world's greatest architectural achievements, and a place long associated with events many have described as miraculous. Completed in AD 537 during the reign of Emperor Justinian I, Hagia Sophia was designed to inspire awe unlike any structure that had come before it. Built in Constantinople by the mathematician Anthemius of Tralles and the engineer Isidore of Miletus, the cathedral combined daring engineering with artistic brilliance on a scale rarely attempted in the ancient world. Contemporary writers struggled to describe its interior, often claiming the building appeared illuminated from within rather than by ordinary sunlight. That impression survives even today. As daylight enters through the ring of windows beneath the central dome, the curved surfaces distribute light in ways that soften shadows and blur architectural boundaries. Visitors often describe the dome as floating effortlessly above the space below. Modern engineers explain this remarkable effect through geometry, careful proportions, and innovative structural design. Yet, for many medieval observers, no mathematical explanation seemed sufficient. They believed something far greater was taking place. Byzantine chronicles preserve numerous accounts of extraordinary phenomena connected with Hagia Sophia. Some spoke of mysterious lights appearing beneath the dome during the night when the building stood empty. Others described luminous columns or unexplained glows surrounding the sanctuary. Pilgrims reported moments in which the interior seemed filled with an otherworldly radiance impossible to attribute to candles or sunlight alone. Were these simply expressions of religious devotion, or observations inspired by unusual natural conditions inside the building? One enduring tradition centers on the so-called weeping column, a marble pillar containing a small opening that often feels damp to the touch. For centuries, visitors have believed its moisture possesses healing qualities. Pilgrims place a finger inside the opening while making silent wishes, continuing a custom that has survived across generations. Scientific explanations point toward condensation. Differences in temperature and humidity within the enormous structure may cause moisture to accumulate inside certain stone surfaces before gradually emerging through tiny cracks. Yet, despite these reasonable explanations, the column continues to attract those who believe something less easily measured resides within the ancient marble. Another mystery concerns the remarkable survival of the building itself. Hagia Sophia stands in one of the world's most seismically active regions. Throughout its history, powerful earthquakes have repeatedly shaken Constantinople, damaging walls, collapsing sections of the original dome, and requiring extensive repairs. Yet, despite enduring nearly 15 centuries of seismic activity, invasions, fires, and changing political eras, the structure remains standing. Modern engineers credit its resilience to ingenious architectural innovations, including flexible brick construction, carefully distributed weight, and later reinforcements added over successive centuries. Even so, researchers continue studying the building's unusual structural behavior, discovering that its response to earthquakes remains surprisingly sophisticated for a monument constructed during the 6th century. More speculative interpretations have naturally followed. Some legends claim hidden relics remain concealed within sealed chambers beneath the structure. Others speak of sacred objects secretly protected inside inaccessible passageways or forgotten vaults. Medieval traditions even describe angels guarding the building or preserving unfinished tasks until a distant future. No convincing evidence supports these accounts, yet they have become inseparable from Hagia Sophia's long cultural history. Perhaps the most fascinating mystery is not whether miracles truly occurred, but why this single building has inspired such stories across so many centuries and cultures. Its architecture produces experiences that often feel larger than ordinary explanation, while its long history encourages each generation to add another layer of wonder. Even after centuries of study, Hagia Sophia continues to balance between engineering and inspiration, between measurable reality and enduring belief. Somewhere within its towering dome, weathered stones, and hidden passages, there may still remain secrets that neither history nor science has fully illuminated. From the soaring dome of Hagia Sophia, where architecture and legend seem to merge, the trail leads toward a quieter mystery hidden beneath the streets of an ancient capital. This time, the question is not about miraculous lights or sacred relics, but about the final resting place of one of the greatest military commanders the Byzantine Empire ever produced. A man whose victories reshaped the Mediterranean, yet whose own grave has disappeared from history. The narrow streets of old Constantinople wind between layers of forgotten centuries. Beneath modern buildings lie buried churches, collapsed cisterns, hidden crypts, and foundations that once belonged to imperial palaces. Countless generations have built upon the remains of those who came before, leaving entire chapters of history sealed beneath stone and soil. Somewhere within this immense archaeological labyrinth, many believe, lies the lost tomb of the general Belisarius. Born around AD 500, Belisarius rose from relative obscurity to become the most celebrated commander of Emperor Justinian I. His campaigns transformed the fortunes of the Byzantine Empire. He defeated the Vandals in North Africa with astonishing speed, reclaimed much of Italy from the Ostrogoths during the Long Gothic War, defended the eastern frontier against the Sasanian Persians, and repeatedly demonstrated a combination of tactical brilliance and remarkable restraint. Contemporary historian Procopius described many of these campaigns in extraordinary detail. Through his writings, Belisarius emerges not merely as a successful general, but as a disciplined leader whose loyalty often endured despite political suspicion and personal setbacks. Few military figures of late antiquity are documented so extensively during their lifetime. Yet, when the story reaches its final chapter, the record grows unexpectedly quiet. Belisarius died around AD 565, shortly before Justinian himself. For a man whose victories altered the course of empires, historians might expect an elaborate mausoleum, a monumental inscription, or at least a clearly recorded burial place. Instead, no confirmed tomb has ever been identified. The absence is striking. One possibility is surprisingly simple. Constantinople has endured repeated earthquakes, devastating fires, crusades, and centuries of urban transformation. Entire districts have vanished beneath later construction. Churches that once contained noble burials were demolished, rebuilt, or converted for new purposes. If Belisarius received burial within one of these lost structures, his resting place may simply have disappeared beneath the changing city. Some historians believe he was buried near the Church of the Holy Apostles, where emperors and prominent members of the Byzantine elite were traditionally interred. Others suggest a smaller monastery or family church may have served as his final resting place. Unfortunately, many of these sacred buildings no longer survive in their original form, and surviving records offer little guidance. Adding to the mystery is the legendary transformation of Belisarius after his death. Centuries later, medieval stories began claiming that the once glorious general had fallen into disgrace, been blinded by Emperor Justinian, and reduced to begging in the streets while pleading, "Give a coin to Belisarius." The tale became enormously popular in European literature and art, symbolizing the cruelty of fortune and the ingratitude of rulers. Yet, most modern historians reject this account. Contemporary Byzantine sources make no mention of Belisarius suffering such a dramatic punishment. Instead, they suggest he retained imperial favor despite periods of political tension. The famous story appears to have emerged many centuries later, gradually replacing historical memory with moral allegory. Even so, the legend influenced another enduring mystery. If later generations misunderstood Belisarius's final years, could they also have lost track of his burial? Some have wondered whether his tomb was deliberately concealed during periods of political instability, either to protect it from desecration or because shifting dynasties preferred to celebrate different heroes. Others imagine that valuable grave goods, if any existed, attracted ancient looters long before official records disappeared. More speculative theories venture beneath the surviving monuments of Istanbul itself. Hidden crypts, forgotten imperial passages, and sealed burial chambers have inspired generations of explorers searching for evidence of Byzantine nobility. While archaeology continues to reveal remarkable discoveries beneath the modern city, none has yet produced convincing evidence connected directly to Belisarius. Perhaps that silence is fitting. A man whose campaigns filled the pages of history seems to have left behind no identifiable monument to himself. His victories remain carefully recorded. His strategies continue to be studied. Yet the place where he was finally laid to rest has become one more unanswered question, buried beneath the layers of time. Somewhere beneath the streets of the old imperial capital, among forgotten churches and collapsed foundations, the tomb of Belisarius may still exist, waiting quietly for the moment when history is finally able to find one of its greatest lost commanders. Unfolds far to the south, where fertile highlands, towering dams, and prosperous trade routes once supported one of Arabia's greatest kingdoms. Unlike a missing grave, this mystery concerns the disappearance of an entire power, whose decline reshaped the region, yet whose final collapse remains surprisingly difficult to explain. The mountains of southern Arabia rise above deep valleys where ancient terraces still cling to steep hillsides. Dry riverbeds cut through the landscape, hinting at seasonal floods that once nourished flourishing farms. Scattered across these highlands stand weathered temples, crumbling fortifications, and inscriptions carved into stone by rulers who believed their kingdom would endure for generations. Among these silent remains lived the people of Himyar, a civilization that transformed one of the driest regions on Earth into a center of wealth and influence. For centuries, the kingdom of Himyar controlled much of southern Arabia, benefiting from its strategic position along trade routes linking the Mediterranean, East Africa, Persia, and India. Caravans carrying frankincense, myrrh, spices, precious textiles, and exotic goods crossed its territory, while nearby ports connected maritime commerce across the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. By the 4th and 5th centuries AD, Himyar had become one of the dominant political powers in the region. Its rulers also oversaw a remarkable religious transformation. Unlike many neighboring kingdoms, the Himyarite elite gradually embraced a form of monotheism during the late 4th century. Royal inscriptions increasingly invoked a single supreme deity rather than multiple traditional gods. Historians continue to debate the precise nature of this religious shift, but it marked a significant departure from earlier Arabian traditions and reshaped the kingdom's political alliances. Then came a period of growing instability. One of the most dramatic episodes occurred during the reign of King Yusuf Asar Yathar, often identified in later traditions as Du Nuwas. Around AD 523, conflicts between religious communities reached a tragic climax in the city of Najran, where ancient sources describe the persecution and killing of many Christians. The event drew widespread attention throughout the surrounding world, prompting powerful neighboring states to intervene. Soon afterward, the Kingdom of Aksum, based across the Red Sea in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, launched a military campaign against Himyar. Backed in part by the Byzantine Empire, Aksumite forces defeated Du Nuwas, ending native Himyarite rule. Although this invasion clearly altered the kingdom's political future, historians increasingly question whether foreign conquest alone explains its sudden collapse. Evidence suggests deeper problems had already begun to weaken the kingdom from within. Trade patterns across the ancient world were changing. Maritime commerce became increasingly important, reducing dependence on traditional overland caravan routes that had enriched southern Arabia for centuries. Economic pressures may have gradually eroded the kingdom's wealth long before armies crossed the Red Sea. Environmental factors also deserve attention. The famous irrigation systems of southern Arabia, including the celebrated Marib Dam, required constant maintenance. For generations, these engineering works supported agriculture across an otherwise arid landscape. Some researchers argue that declining political stability made large-scale repairs increasingly difficult. As irrigation networks deteriorated, agricultural productivity may have declined, placing additional strain on both the economy and the population. Climate may have played a role as well. Paleoclimate studies suggest that parts of Arabia experienced periods of prolonged environmental stress during late antiquity. Even modest shifts in rainfall could have affected harvests, water supplies, and settlement patterns, particularly in regions dependent upon carefully managed irrigation. More speculative interpretations look beyond economics and climate. Some later traditions describe the collapse as divine judgment, while regional folklore speaks of catastrophic floods and sudden destruction. The dramatic failure of the Marib Dam became deeply embedded in cultural memory, symbolizing the end of an entire civilization. Although modern archaeology suggests the decline unfolded over many decades, rather than through a single catastrophic event. These stories continue to shape how the kingdom is remembered. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in how quickly such a powerful state faded from prominence. Within only a few generations, Himyar's political independence had disappeared, its influence absorbed by larger regional empires, and many of its achievements gradually forgotten outside the inscriptions carved into stone. Today, those weathered texts, abandoned terraces, and ruined cities still overlook the valleys where a thriving kingdom once flourished. They remain silent witnesses to a civilization whose fall cannot be explained by any single invasion, drought, or political crisis alone. Somewhere among those ancient mountains, the missing pieces of Himyar's final chapter may still be waiting to emerge from the dust of time. As the kingdom of Himyar faded from the historical stage through a complex web of political upheaval, economic change, and environmental uncertainty, another mystery unfolded within the heart of the Byzantine Empire. This time, the unanswered questions surround not the fall of a kingdom, but the final years of an emperor whose troubled reign ended under circumstances that historians still struggle to fully understand. The corridors of the Great Palace in Constantinople stretch through dimly lit halls lined with polished marble and fading mosaics. Behind heavy bronze doors, whispers pass between officials, guards, and servants, each carrying fragments of rumor rather than certainty. Beyond the palace walls, the empire continues its daily rhythm, but inside, anxiety hangs over the court. The emperor, who once inherited one of the world's greatest powers, is becoming increasingly isolated, and few know what is truly unfolding behind closed chambers. When Emperor Justinian I died in AD 565, his nephew Justin II inherited an empire that stretched from Italy to the Near East. It was an impressive inheritance, but also an enormous burden. Decades of military campaigns had strained imperial finances, while rival powers watched closely for any sign of weakness. Justin II entered the throne determined to restore imperial authority and reduce dependence on costly diplomatic payments made to neighboring states. His ambitions soon met harsh reality. Refusing to continue annual tribute payments to the Avars and adopting a more confrontational policy toward the Sasanian Persian Empire, Justin II found himself facing simultaneous military crises on multiple frontiers. War erupted in the east, pressure mounted in the Balkans, and resources became increasingly stretched. Within only a few years, the optimism that had marked the beginning of his reign gave way to growing instability. Then came the reports that have puzzled historians ever since. Several contemporary and near-contemporary writers describe dramatic changes in the emperor's behavior. According to these accounts, Justin II experienced violent emotional outbursts, periods of profound distress, and episodes during which he reportedly reacted unpredictably toward those around him. Some sources claim that music was played continuously within the palace in an effort to calm him. Others describe attendants carefully managing his daily routine while government affairs gradually shifted into other hands. How accurate are these descriptions? Modern historians approach them cautiously. Byzantine chroniclers often interpreted illness through moral, religious, or political lenses. An emperor's personal suffering could easily become a literary symbol reflecting divine displeasure or imperial decline. Exaggeration was not uncommon, particularly when later writers sought to explain military setbacks or political failures. Nevertheless, there appears to be little doubt that Justin II became increasingly unable to govern during the later years of his reign. One possible explanation is neurological illness. Some scholars have proposed conditions affecting the brain that might account for changes in personality, judgment, and emotional regulation. Others have suggested psychiatric disorders, though applying modern diagnostic categories to historical figures remains highly uncertain. Without physical evidence, every retrospective diagnosis remains speculative. Another possibility involves chronic physical disease. Severe pain, infection, or metabolic illness can sometimes produce cognitive disturbances, particularly when untreated by ancient medicine. Contemporary physicians possessed remarkable knowledge for their era, yet many conditions that are manageable today would have remained mysterious and potentially fatal in the 6th century. Political intrigue has also entered the discussion. The Byzantine court was rarely free from rivalry. Powerful officials, military commanders, and influential noble families all competed for imperial favor. Some historians have wondered whether reports concerning Justin's deteriorating condition were amplified to justify shifting authority toward trusted advisors, particularly Empress Sophia and the capable general Tiberius, who was eventually adopted as Justin's heir and later became emperor himself. More speculative theories suggest poisoning or deliberate medical interference, pointing to the intense political stakes surrounding imperial succession. However, no contemporary source provides convincing evidence for assassination, and most historians regard such claims with considerable skepticism. They remain possibilities born more from the atmosphere of palace politics than from documented fact. Justin II died in AD 578, after several years during which effective power had largely passed to Tiberius. Official records describe the transition with relative order, yet they leave many essential questions unanswered. What illness truly transformed a determined ruler into an emperor unable to govern? Were contemporary observers accurately recording what they witnessed, or shaping events into narratives that reflected their own political and religious perspectives? The marble halls where Justin II spent his final years have long since changed, but the uncertainty surrounding his death endures. Somewhere within forgotten medical texts, overlooked palace records, or discoveries still buried beneath ancient Constantinople, clues may yet survive. Until then, the final chapter of Justin II's life remains another historical anomaly, one where the silence surrounding an emperor proves almost as intriguing as the empire he once ruled. As the unanswered questions surrounding Emperor Justin II fade into the background, another royal mystery emerges in the kingdoms that rose from the ruins of the Western Roman Empire. This time, the puzzle does not concern an emperor's final days, but a crown that symbolized centuries of power, a royal treasure whose true story remains surprisingly uncertain. Morning mist settles over the medieval town of Monza in northern Italy. Ancient church bells echo through quiet streets as sunlight filters across weathered stone walls and narrow courtyards. Inside the city's historic cathedral, behind protective glass and carefully guarded displays, rests one of Europe's most famous royal artifacts, the Iron Crown of Lombardy. Small in size yet immense in historical importance, it has crowned kings, inspired legends, and puzzled historians for generations. At first glance, the crown appears almost modest. Unlike the towering jeweled crowns associated with later monarchs, it consists of 6 gold plates joined by intricate hinges and decorated with precious stones and colored enamel. Hidden within its interior lies a narrow metallic band that gave the crown its enduring name. According to medieval tradition, this inner ring was forged from one of the nails used during the crucifixion of Jesus, transforming the crown into both a political symbol and a sacred relic. For centuries, rulers sought the privilege of wearing it. Lombard kings were traditionally crowned with it after establishing their kingdom in northern Italy during the 6th century. Later, rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, including Charlemagne and several of his successors, were also associated with the crown as a symbol of legitimate authority over Italy. Napoleon Bonaparte famously crowned himself King of Italy with it in AD 1805, declaring that only God could remove it from his head. Yet, despite its remarkable history, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Was the Iron Crown truly the original crown of the Lombard kings? Scientific examinations have complicated the traditional narrative. Studies of its goldwork suggest that different sections may have been created during different historical periods. Some decorative elements appear to date to late antiquity, while other components were likely repaired or added centuries later. Rather than a single object preserved unchanged through time, the crown may represent the product of repeated restoration and modification across generations. The legendary Iron Band presents an even greater mystery. For centuries, it was believed to contain iron from the Holy Nail itself. However, modern scientific analysis has raised unexpected doubts. Some examinations suggest the inner band may consist primarily of silver rather than iron, while others argue that earlier repairs or replacements may have altered the original material. If the sacred iron once existed, was it removed, replaced, or simply misunderstood through centuries of tradition? The uncertainties do not end there. Several historians have proposed that the original Lombard royal crown may have disappeared long ago, perhaps lost during war, hidden during political upheaval, or dismantled for its precious materials. The object preserved today could represent only part of the original regalia, carefully reconstructed using surviving elements after centuries of damage. The turbulent history of medieval Italy certainly provides opportunities for such losses. Kingdoms rose and fell, cities changed rulers, and invading armies repeatedly crossed the peninsula. During periods of conflict, royal treasures were often concealed inside monasteries, churches, or fortified strongholds. Some disappeared forever. Others resurfaced generations later with incomplete records and uncertain identities. More speculative traditions suggest an even deeper mystery. According to certain legends, additional Lombard regalia, including ceremonial swords, scepters, and perhaps another royal crown, were hidden before major invasions and never recovered. While no convincing archaeological evidence has confirmed these stories, they continue to inspire treasure hunters and historians alike, encouraging the belief that fragments of Lombard royalty may still remain buried beneath forgotten castles or abandoned monasteries. There are also questions surrounding the crown's earliest origins. Some researchers believe parts of it may have belonged to an earlier Roman imperial diadem, later adapted by the Lombards to reinforce their own legitimacy. Others suggest it was created specifically for a Christian ruler seeking to unite sacred symbolism with royal authority. The surviving evidence allows neither possibility to be proven beyond doubt. Perhaps the greatest anomaly is that an artifact displayed openly before millions of visitors can still conceal so many unanswered questions. Every gemstone, every hinge, and every layer of ancient metal carries traces of a story that remains incomplete. Whether the Iron Crown is truly the lost crown of the Lombards, a carefully preserved reconstruction, or the surviving fragment of something even older, its secrets continue to rest quietly behind glass, inviting each generation to look closer and wonder how much of its remarkable history has yet to be uncovered. As the mystery of the Lombards' royal crown lingers between history and legend, another puzzle emerges, not one hidden inside gold or precious stones, but within words that may have vanished forever. Sometimes, the greatest lost treasure is not an object at all, but knowledge. And few missing collections have inspired more quiet speculation than the lost archives of Cassiodorus. The remains of an ancient monastery stand on a hillside overlooking the calm waters of southern Italy. Broken columns rise from the earth, while fragments of mosaic shimmer beneath centuries of dust. Olive trees sway gently in the breeze, and beneath their roots may lie the forgotten foundations of one of the most ambitious centers of learning in the early medieval world. Here, according to tradition, manuscripts once filled shelves stretching across quiet halls where scribes worked patiently by candlelight, preserving the fading memory of the ancient world. At the center of this remarkable effort stood Flavius Magnus Aurelius Cassiodorus. Born around AD 485, Cassiodorus served as a senior statesman under the Ostrogothic kings of Italy, including the famous ruler Theodoric the Great. Unlike many political figures of his age, he believed that the wisdom of both classical Rome and Christian scholarship deserved careful preservation. During a time marked by wars and the gradual collapse of imperial institutions, he devoted his later life to safeguarding knowledge that might otherwise disappear. After retiring from public service, Cassiodorus established the monastery of Vivarium on the coast of Calabria. It was unlike most religious communities of its time. Alongside prayer and contemplation, monks were encouraged to copy manuscripts with extraordinary precision. Works on theology, philosophy, history, grammar, medicine, astronomy, and classical literature were gathered into an organized library, creating what many historians consider one of the earliest systematic efforts to preserve Western learning after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Fortunately, some of Cassiodorus's own writings survive. His Variae preserve official correspondence from the Ostrogothic administration, offering invaluable insights into politics, diplomacy, and daily governance during the 6th century. His Institutions outlines an educational program designed to guide monks in studying both sacred and secular texts. These surviving works reveal a man deeply committed to collecting, organizing, and transmitting knowledge. Yet, they also hint at something much larger. Cassiodorus repeatedly referred to books, commentaries, translations, and historical sources that no longer exist. He described collections that extended far beyond the manuscripts known today. If Vivarium truly housed such an extensive library, what became of the rest? The historical record offers remarkably few answers. Unlike many famous libraries whose destruction is linked to specific invasions or fires, the fate of Vivarium unfolded almost silently. No detailed contemporary account describes the dispersal of its manuscripts. The monastery gradually disappears from written history, leaving scholars to reconstruct its final years from scattered references and indirect evidence. One possibility is that the library was never destroyed in a single catastrophe. Instead, its books may have been slowly copied, borrowed, relocated, or divided among monasteries across Italy and Europe. In this view, the collection did not vanish. It dissolved into countless smaller libraries, making its original identity impossible to reconstruct. Others point to the turbulent centuries that followed. Italy experienced repeated invasions, political upheaval, earthquakes, and shifting centers of power. Monastic communities were abandoned, rebuilt, or absorbed into larger institutions. During such instability, fragile parchment manuscripts could easily be lost through neglect, moisture, insects, or simple decay. Yet, the possibility of hidden discoveries continues to inspire historians. Throughout the modern era, forgotten manuscripts have repeatedly emerged from monastery storerooms, cathedral libraries, and private collections. Palimpsests, parchment pages where older texts were scraped away and overwritten, have revealed works once believed permanently lost. Advances in multispectral imaging now allow scholars to recover writing invisible to the naked eye, suggesting that forgotten voices may still survive beneath later ink. More speculative traditions imagine sealed chambers beneath the original site of Vivarium, where portions of Cassiodorus's collection escaped destruction altogether. Others wonder whether unidentified manuscripts resting quietly in European libraries may actually descend from his original archive, their origins forgotten through centuries of copying. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the missing archives still exist, but how much of the ancient world disappeared with them. Cassiodorus stood at a rare crossroads between Rome and the medieval age, preserving memories from a civilization already fading into history. Somewhere, within an overlooked manuscript, a neglected monastery, or a forgotten shelf untouched for centuries, another fragment of that vanished archive may still be waiting. If it is ever found, it may not simply answer old questions. It could reveal entirely new chapters of history that no one realized had been lost. As the missing archives of Cassiodorus remind us how easily knowledge can disappear, another mystery invites us into a landscape where entire strongholds may have slipped beyond memory. This time, the search is not for forgotten manuscripts, but for stone walls that once guarded one of Central Asia's most enigmatic empires, the White Huns, better known to historians as the Hephtalites. The first light of dawn spreads across the rugged mountains of Central Asia, revealing isolated ridges, deep river valleys, and windswept plateaus where ancient caravan routes once crossed some of the world's most unforgiving terrain. Broken towers stand above narrow passes, while weathered mud-brick walls slowly dissolve back into the earth. Many of these ruins remain unnamed, their builders uncertain, their histories incomplete. Somewhere among them, historians believe, may lie the forgotten fortress of the White Huns. During the 5th and 6th centuries AD, the Hephthalites emerged as one of the most powerful empires in Asia. Their armies defeated rival kingdoms, controlled key sections of the Silk Road, and forced even the mighty Sasanian Persian Empire into humiliating defeats. They ruled territories stretching across parts of modern Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and neighboring regions, commanding trade routes that linked China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean. Yet, despite their enormous influence, remarkably few Hephthalite cities or military centers have been identified with certainty. This absence has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Unlike the Romans, Sasanians, or Byzantines, the Hephthalites left behind very few written records of their own. Most surviving descriptions come from foreign observers, whose accounts often focused on battles and diplomacy rather than geography. Capitals are mentioned only briefly. Fortified settlements are described without precise locations. Even the names of important strongholds often changed as different languages recorded them. As a result, historians are left searching vast landscapes with only scattered clues. Several archaeological sites have been proposed as possible Hephthalite fortresses. Massive defensive complexes discovered in northern Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan display impressive walls, watchtowers, and strategic positions overlooking major trade corridors. Some contain coins bearing Hephthalite rulers, while others reveal pottery, weapons, and luxury goods dating to the correct period. Yet none can be identified beyond doubt as the empire's principal fortress or royal stronghold. One candidate is the ancient city of Bala Hisar near Balkh, a settlement occupied by many successive civilizations. Others point toward fortified sites in the Upper Oxus region, where mountain passes offered natural defenses and access to lucrative trade. Each location provides intriguing evidence, but each also presents difficulties. Continuous occupation over many centuries has layered one civilization upon another, making it extraordinarily difficult to separate Hephthalite construction from later rebuilding. Their disappearance only deepens the mystery. After their defeat by the alliance of the Göktürks and the Sasanian Empire in the mid-6th century, Hephthalite political authority collapsed with remarkable speed. Some fortresses may have been abandoned, others captured and remodeled by new rulers. Earthquakes, erosion, warfare, and centuries of rebuilding gradually erased architectural features that might once have revealed their origins. Satellite imagery and modern archaeological surveys continue to identify previously unknown fortifications hidden beneath desert sands and agricultural fields. Every newly discovered enclosure raises fresh possibilities. Could one of these forgotten ruins represent the administrative heart of the White Huns? Or were their centers of power more mobile than historians have long assumed, relying on seasonal courts rather than permanent capitals? More speculative theories imagine hidden mountain citadels concealed in valleys still difficult to access today. Local folklore across parts of Central Asia occasionally speaks of abandoned stone strongholds belonging to forgotten kings whose names no longer appear in surviving chronicles. While such traditions cannot be treated as historical evidence, they often preserve echoes of places that formal records have overlooked before. Perhaps the greatest puzzle is not whether the fortress existed, but why so little remains of an empire that once challenged the greatest powers of its age. Somewhere beyond the better-known ruins of the Silk Road, Beneath collapsing walls or layers of wind-blown earth, a forgotten citadel may still wait in silence. If it is ever uncovered, it could reveal not only where the White Huns ruled, but how one of antiquity's most formidable empires quietly disappeared from history while leaving behind little more than scattered stones and unanswered questions. As the forgotten fortresses of the White Huns fade back into the vast landscapes of Central Asia, another mystery emerges farther west, where the collapse of an empire left behind no single battlefield, no final monument, and no clear ending. Instead, it left unanswered questions about the people who had once stood at the very center of Roman power, and then quietly disappeared from history. The marble columns of an abandoned Roman villa stand beneath an open sky, their cracked surfaces wrapped in climbing vines. Empty courtyards echo only with the sound of wind passing through broken archways, while faded mosaics lie half-buried beneath layers of soil. Once, these estates belonged to senators, generals, and aristocratic families whose influence reached across the Western Roman Empire. Today, their homes survive as silent ruins, but the people who built them seem to vanish almost without a trace. When the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed in AD 476, later generations came to regard the event as the symbolic end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet, empires do not simply disappear overnight. Governments collapse, borders shift, and armies disband, but the people who once governed them must still face an uncertain future. Among the greatest mysteries of this transition is the fate of Rome's ancient aristocracy. For centuries, powerful noble families had dominated political life in the city of Rome and throughout Italy. Their fortunes were built upon vast agricultural estates, prestigious public offices, and networks of influence extending across the empire. They funded churches, commissioned public buildings, preserved classical literature, and often served as the link between imperial authority and local administration. Then, the political landscape changed dramatically. Successive waves of conflict swept across Italy during the 5th and 6th centuries. The rule of Odoacer gave way to the Ostrogothic kingdom under Theodoric the Great. Later, the Byzantine reconquest launched by Emperor Justinian plunged the peninsula into the devastating Gothic War, a conflict that lasted for nearly 2 decades. Cities were besieged repeatedly, farmland was abandoned, and populations declined under the combined pressures of warfare, famine, and disease. What became of the old Roman elite during these upheavals? Some historical sources suggest many noble families adapted remarkably well. Rather than resisting every new ruler, they negotiated with successive governments, preserving portions of their estates and social influence under barbarian kings. Men such as Cassiodorus and Boethius demonstrate that members of the Roman aristocracy continued serving in high administrative positions long after imperial authority had faded. Others were far less fortunate. Several prominent senators were executed during periods of political suspicion. Estates were confiscated. Ancient family fortunes fragmented through war and economic decline. Entire lineages that had shaped Roman politics for centuries disappear from surviving records with surprising speed. Yet, disappearance from written history does not necessarily mean extinction. Archaeology paints a more gradual picture. Excavations of late Roman villas reveal continued occupation in some regions well into the 6th century. Luxury goods become less common, but settlement often persists. In other locations, aristocratic residences were transformed into monasteries, fortified farms, or smaller rural communities. Rather than collapsing suddenly, elite society appears to have evolved into something new. Genealogists have long wondered whether descendants of these noble families survived under different names. Medieval, aristocratic houses occasionally claimed Roman ancestry, though such assertions are notoriously difficult to verify. Without continuous written records, separating genuine family continuity from political tradition remains almost impossible. There are also more intriguing possibilities. Some historians suggest that private libraries, family archives, and collections of classical manuscripts belonging to Rome's elite were quietly dispersed during these turbulent decades. Hidden inside monasteries, inherited through marriage, or transported into safer regions, these collections may have preserved fragments of ancient literature that would otherwise have vanished forever. More speculative theories imagine certain noble families retreating into remote estates beyond the centers of political conflict, maintaining elements of Roman culture for generations, while gradually blending into the emerging medieval world. Although archaeological evidence offers only limited support for such ideas, isolated discoveries occasionally reveal surprising continuity where historians once assumed complete collapse. Perhaps the greatest anomaly is that one of history's most influential ruling classes seems to fade away without a definitive ending. There is no single document recording their final chapter, no monument marking their disappearance, and no agreed moment when Rome's ancient nobility truly ceased to exist. Instead, they dissolve into the changing societies of early medieval Europe, leaving behind ruined villas, scattered inscriptions, forgotten family names, and lingering questions. Somewhere beneath those abandoned estates or inside overlooked archives, another fragment of their story may still survive, waiting to reveal what became of the last nobles of the Western Roman Empire. As the trail of the last Western Roman nobles disappears into abandoned villas and fading family records, another mystery emerges far beyond the boundaries of crumbling empires. This time, the unanswered questions are carried not by ruined cities or forgotten dynasties, but by the sea itself, a place where maps once dissolved into imagination, and where every distant horizon promised lands no one could prove existed. Gray waves roll endlessly across the North Atlantic, rising and falling beneath a sky where clouds drift low over the water. Jagged cliffs disappear behind curtains of mist, while isolated islands emerge only briefly before fading once again into the fog. Here, the ocean offers few landmarks and even fewer certainties. A sailor may spend days surrounded by nothing but wind, water, and silence, until a distant shoreline suddenly appears where moments earlier there had been only empty sea. It is within this shifting landscape that one of the medieval world's most enduring maritime mysteries begins, the legendary Voyage of St. Brendan. According to Irish tradition, Brendan of Clonfert was born around AD 484 and became one of Ireland's most celebrated early Christian monks. Known as a gifted teacher and missionary, he established monasteries throughout Ireland during an era when the island had become an important center of learning, while much of Western Europe struggled through political fragmentation. Yet Brendan's lasting fame would come not from the monasteries he founded, but from an extraordinary journey described centuries later in a remarkable Latin text known as the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. The account tells of Brendan setting sail with a small group of monks in search of the promised land of the saints, a mysterious paradise said to exist somewhere beyond the Western Ocean. Their vessel was unlike the wooden ships commonly associated with medieval exploration. Instead, it was described as a currach, a lightweight boat constructed from a wooden frame covered with animal hides sealed by grease. Such vessels were well suited to the coastal waters of Ireland, but according to the story, Brendan carried this humble craft far into the vast Atlantic. What followed reads like a journey balanced delicately between geography and legend. The monks reportedly encountered islands unlike any known land. One appeared peaceful until they discovered it was actually the back of an enormous whale resting beneath the sea. Another contained trees filled with brilliantly white birds said to be fallen angels occupying neither heaven nor hell. They visited an island where monks lived in perfect silence, another dominated by towering crystal pillars, and another surrounded by thick fog where time itself seemed strangely altered. To medieval readers, these episodes carried profound spiritual symbolism. The voyage was understood as both an adventure and an allegory, illustrating the soul's search for divine truth. Yet, beneath the religious imagery lies an intriguing question that has fascinated historians for generations. Could the narrative preserve fragments of an actual voyage? The Atlantic is filled with natural phenomena capable of inspiring extraordinary stories. Volcanic islands rise unexpectedly from the sea. Icebergs gleam like crystal towers beneath a certain light. Dense banks of fog can transform familiar coastlines into landscapes that appear almost supernatural. Large whales surfacing beneath calm waters could easily astonish sailors unfamiliar with their size and behavior. Some researchers have suggested that parts of Brendan's voyage may reflect genuine observations, gradually reshaped through oral tradition. The geographical possibilities are surprisingly broad. Certain descriptions resemble the Faroe Islands, whose steep cliffs and immense seabird colonies would have appeared remarkable to early Irish sailors. Others point toward Iceland, where volcanic activity, hot springs, and unusual geological formations might explain several episodes in the narrative. A few scholars have even explored the possibility that Brendan or later traditions preserved distant memories of lands beyond the North Atlantic, perhaps reaching Greenland or even the eastern shores of North America centuries before the Viking expeditions. This idea gained renewed attention during the 20th century. In the 1970s, British explorer Tim Severin constructed a leather-covered boat using materials and techniques believed to resemble those available during Brendan's lifetime. Sailing from Ireland through the Hebrides, Faroe Islands, Iceland, and Greenland, Severin successfully reached Newfoundland in Canada. His expedition did not prove that Brendan himself completed such a voyage, but it demonstrated that a vessel matching the medieval descriptions could survive the Atlantic crossing under favorable conditions. Even so, the historical questions remain unresolved. The Navigatio was written centuries after Brendan's lifetime, making it impossible to determine how much derives from authentic oral memory and how much reflects literary creativity. Medieval writers frequently blended real geography with symbolic storytelling, making strict historical interpretation difficult. Every island in the narrative may represent an actual location, a theological lesson, or perhaps a combination of both. There are also tantalizing details that continue to puzzle scholars. Certain descriptions of floating ice, unusual sea creatures, volcanic landscapes, and prolonged northern daylight seem unexpectedly consistent with environments found far beyond Ireland. Are these merely remarkable coincidences, or subtle echoes of voyages whose details gradually transformed into sacred legend? More speculative theories extend even further. Some suggest Brendan reached parts of North America long before Leif Erikson, while others imagine the mysterious Promised Land, symbolizing an island that has since disappeared beneath changing coastlines or rising seas. A few enthusiasts even connect the voyage with legends of Atlantis, or other lost civilizations hidden somewhere in the Atlantic. None of these ideas has been supported by convincing archaeological evidence, yet their persistence reflects the enduring power of the story. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether every event described in the Navigatio literally occurred, but why the tale continues to blur the boundaries between exploration, faith, and memory. Somewhere beneath centuries of copying, translation, and retelling may survive the distant echo of a real expedition undertaken by courageous sailors navigating an ocean few dared to enter. The waves that carried Brendan's boat have long since erased every physical trace of his passage, but they have never erased the questions. Beyond the western horizon, where mist still conceals isolated islands and unfamiliar coastlines, the sea continues to guard its oldest secrets, inviting us to wonder whether St. Brendan sailed farther than history has ever been able to prove. As St. Brendan's legendary voyage disappears into the mist of the North Atlantic, another mystery leads us not across uncharted seas, but behind the guarded walls of an empire where knowledge itself became one of the most valuable treasures on Earth. This time, the unanswered questions are woven not into maps or monuments, but into threads so fine that kingdoms fought to possess them, and into techniques that, despite their enormous importance, seem to have faded almost without a trace. Sunlight filters through the narrow windows of an ancient workshop, illuminating rows of wooden looms standing in near silence. Fine strands of silk catch the light like liquid gold, while unfinished fabrics shimmer with deep crimson, royal purple, emerald green, and brilliant blue. Skilled hands move carefully across the threads, following patterns so complex they appear almost mathematical. Every motion has been practiced for years, perhaps decades. Yet the craftsmen speak little. Their greatest skill is not simply weaving beautiful cloth, it is protecting the knowledge that makes such beauty possible. For centuries, silk was among the most coveted luxury materials in the world. Long before the Byzantine Empire mastered its production, raw silk traveled westward from China along the vast network of caravan routes known today as the Silk Road. The fabric was so valuable that it often served as diplomatic gifts, royal tribute, and even a form of wealth comparable to precious metals. Control over its supply could influence commerce, politics, and international relations across continents. According to Byzantine tradition, everything changed during the reign of Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century. Several historical accounts describe two monks returning from distant Asia carrying an extraordinary secret. Hidden inside hollow bamboo staffs, they reportedly concealed silkworm eggs together with the knowledge needed to cultivate them. Whether every detail of the story is accurate remains uncertain, but most historians agree that by the middle of the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire had established its own silk industry, ending centuries of dependence on imported raw materials. The consequences were immense. Imperial workshops in Constantinople began producing fabrics of exceptional quality, many reserved exclusively for the emperor, members of the royal court, and high-ranking officials. Certain colors, particularly the famous Tyrian purple, became powerful symbols of authority. Elaborate silks embroidered with eagles, lions, saints, and geometric designs were traded across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, becoming some of the most admired textiles of the medieval world. Yet, what made Byzantine silk truly remarkable was not merely the material itself. The empire developed closely guarded techniques involving spinning, dyeing, weaving, embroidery, and finishing processes that transformed ordinary thread into works of extraordinary complexity. State-controlled workshops carefully supervised production, while skilled artisans passed specialized knowledge through tightly regulated apprenticeships. Some manufacturing methods may have remained known to only a limited number of master craftsmen. Then, over the centuries, many of those techniques disappeared. Historians understand the general principles of Byzantine silk production, but numerous practical details remain uncertain. Ancient texts rarely describe manufacturing methods in sufficient depth. Instead, they often praise the finished textiles while saying remarkably little about how they were created. The craftsmen themselves left behind few technical manuals, perhaps deliberately protecting their trade from competitors. The fall of Constantinople in AD 1204 during the Fourth Crusade dealt a devastating blow to many imperial institutions. Workshops were disrupted, treasures were looted, and countless artisans fled or were displaced. Although silk weaving continued under later rulers and spread into cities such as Venice, Lucca, and Palermo, historians continue to debate how much authentic Byzantine expertise survived the upheaval. The final capture of Constantinople in AD 1453 introduced another period of profound transformation. By then, many imperial workshops had already declined, while political and economic changes reshaped traditional industries throughout the region. As generations passed, certain methods were preserved, others evolved, and some may simply have been forgotten. Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. Fragments of Byzantine silk recovered from royal tombs, churches, and archaeological excavations reveal astonishing craftsmanship. Microscopic analysis has uncovered intricate weaving structures that remain difficult to reproduce using only the written descriptions that survive. Chemical studies of ancient dyes continue to identify sophisticated combinations of natural pigments, mordants, and finishing treatments that demonstrate an advanced understanding of textile technology. Yet, the artifacts often raise more questions than they answer. Modern conservators can examine the final products in extraordinary detail, but reconstructing every stage of their manufacture remains far more difficult. Were certain weaving techniques unique to individual workshops? Did master artisans possess closely guarded methods never committed to writing? Or have the necessary documents simply disappeared alongside countless other lost manuscripts of the Byzantine world? More speculative theories suggest that portions of this knowledge may still survive unnoticed. Some historians wonder whether forgotten workshop manuals remain hidden within uncatalogued monastery libraries or private collections, waiting to be recognized for what they are. Others believe fragments of Byzantine expertise quietly survived by passing into neighboring textile traditions, preserved through practice even after their origins had been forgotten. There are even legends describing sealed imperial storerooms where ceremonial robes, weaving equipment, and technical records were hidden during times of invasion, though no convincing evidence has confirmed such accounts. The mystery extends beyond silk itself. It reminds us how easily specialized knowledge can disappear, even when the objects it created continue to survive. A magnificent textile may endure for 1,000 years, while the hands that produced it leave behind no written explanation of their craft. Perhaps that is the greatest anomaly. The Byzantine Empire succeeded in preserving and refining one of the world's most valuable industries for centuries, yet many of the techniques that made its silks so extraordinary remain only partially understood today. Somewhere, concealed within an overlooked manuscript, an unopened archive, or the faded memories embedded in ancient fabric, another thread of this forgotten knowledge may still exist. Until it is found, the shimmering silks of Byzantium continue to whisper of a craftsmanship whose finest secrets have slipped quietly beyond the reach of history. As the forgotten secrets of Byzantine silk remind us how easily human knowledge can disappear, another mystery emerges from the mist-covered landscapes of early medieval Britain. This time, the missing treasure is not hidden inside a royal workshop or guarded behind palace walls. It is hidden within the silence between surviving words, the lost pages, forgotten records, and vanished accounts that may have once explained one of the most uncertain moments in British history. Along the western shores of Britain, ancient hills rise above valleys covered in fog and rain. Stone ruins stand scattered across the landscape, remnants of churches, settlements, and fortifications built during a period when the memory of Rome was slowly fading. The roads that once carried imperial armies had grown quiet. The cities that had once displayed Roman power were changing into smaller communities. In this uncertain world, where old structures were disappearing and new kingdoms were forming, A small number of writers attempted to preserve the memory of a changing age. Among them was a man whose name would become inseparable from the mystery of post-Roman Britain, Gildas. Little is known about his life with certainty. Most historians place him somewhere in the 6th century, possibly born around AD 500. Later traditions connect him with regions of western Britain and Ireland, though many details remain debated. Unlike famous rulers or military commanders, Gildas left behind no monuments, no royal lineage, and no clear record of his personal journey. Instead, his legacy survives through a single important work. Known as De Excidio et Conquestu Britanniae, or The Ruin and Conquest of Britain, the text provides one of the earliest surviving descriptions of Britain after the departure of Roman authority. It is not a traditional historical chronicle filled with dates, battles, and political events. Rather, it is a passionate religious warning, a moral examination of the leaders and society of his time. Gildas looked upon his world as one experiencing decline. He criticized British kings for what he considered arrogance, cruelty, and abandonment of moral responsibility. He described a society suffering from conflict and instability, where rulers competed for power while ignoring the suffering of ordinary people. His writing paints a dramatic picture of a land struggling to adapt after centuries of Roman influence had disappeared. Yet, within these criticisms are fragments of information that historians still depend upon today. Gildas mentions conflicts between Britons and invading Saxon forces. He refers to a great battle known as Baden, a victory that later medieval traditions connected with King Arthur. However, Gildas never names Arthur. He provides no heroic figure, no legendary sword, and no detailed account of the battle itself. This silence has created one of the most fascinating questions in early British history. If Arthur existed as a powerful military leader, why did Gildas not mention him? Was Arthur a later invention created from scattered memories of several different warriors? Did Gildas avoid naming him because the figure was controversial or politically inconvenient? Or did the original events become transformed through centuries of storytelling until the historical person disappeared beneath layers of legend? The answer may have existed in writings that no longer survive. Gildas was not writing in isolation. He lived during a period when knowledge was still being passed through monasteries, churches, and local communities. He likely had access to earlier traditions, oral accounts, and perhaps written records that have since vanished. His references often assume his readers already understand certain events, leaving modern historians searching for missing pieces. What happened to these earlier sources? The disappearance of written material from this era is not surprising. The centuries following the collapse of Roman administration were marked by political instability and major cultural changes. Manuscripts were fragile objects, created from expensive materials and requiring constant care. A single destroyed monastery, abandoned library, or forgotten archive could erase generations of accumulated knowledge. Unlike stone monuments that can survive for millennia, parchment could disappear within decades. Fire, moisture, insects, warfare, and simple neglect all contributed to the loss of countless texts. The writings of ancient authors survived only because later generations chose to copy them. Works that were considered less important, politically inconvenient, or simply forgotten were often never reproduced. Perhaps some of Gildas's own writings suffered this fate. Later, medieval authors occasionally refer to other works attributed to him, suggesting that he may have written additional texts beyond De Excidio. Some traditions mention letters, religious commentaries, or teachings that are no longer known today. Whether these works truly existed or were based on misunderstandings remains uncertain, but the possibility adds another layer to the mystery. What information might they have contained? A lost chronicle from Gildas could potentially reveal details about early British kingdoms, The identities of regional rulers, the aftermath of Roman withdrawal, and the true circumstances surrounding conflicts later transformed into legends. It might clarify the origins of stories surrounding figures like Arthur, or explain how certain political traditions survived into the medieval period. Yet, the search for lost texts is complicated. Even when ancient writings survive, they are often hidden in unexpected forms. Some manuscripts were reused because parchment was valuable. Older writings were scraped away and replaced with newer texts, creating what scholars call palimpsests. Modern imaging technology has occasionally recovered traces of forgotten words beneath later writing, revealing works that had been considered permanently lost. Could fragments connected to Gildas still exist beneath later manuscripts? It is possible, though no confirmed discovery has answered that question. Other possibilities are equally intriguing. Lost chronicles may have survived indirectly, with later medieval historians unknowingly preserving pieces of earlier sources. A single sentence copied from an unknown 6th century text could represent the final surviving echo of an entire lost tradition. Some researchers have also suggested that oral traditions may have preserved memories of events that written records failed to capture. In societies where storytelling remained central, important events could survive for generations through songs, poems, and family traditions. However, separating genuine historical memory from later invention remains one of the greatest challenges facing historians. The mystery of Gildas is therefore not only about one missing document. It represents a much larger question about how civilizations remember and forget. The early medieval world was not empty or silent. It was filled with people who experienced wars, political struggles, religious transformations, and cultural changes. Yet, much of their world disappeared because the records that preserved their voices were never passed forward. Gildas stands as both a witness and a reminder. His surviving words allow us to glimpse a forgotten age, but they also reveal how much remains hidden beyond the edge of the surviving record. Somewhere between ruined monasteries, forgotten archives, and manuscripts still waiting to be examined, fragments of another story may remain. Perhaps one day, a forgotten page will emerge from the darkness and reshape everything historians believe about post-Roman Britain. Until then, the missing chronicles of Gildas continue to exist as one of history's quietest mysteries, a reminder that the past is not only what survives, but also what has been lost. As the missing writings of Gildas leave behind questions about the fragile nature of memory in early medieval Britain, another mystery emerges from the same uncertain world. This time, the search moves away from forgotten manuscripts and toward objects that carried spiritual meaning, relics believed to preserve the presence of one of the most influential figures of the age. Yet, many of these treasures, once guarded by powerful monasteries and revered by generations of believers, have disappeared into the silence of history. On the remote island of Iona, where waves from the Atlantic crash against rocky shores and mist often covers the landscape, the remains of an ancient monastery stand as a reminder of a remarkable chapter in European history. Stone crosses rise above the grass, carved with intricate patterns that have survived more than 1,000 years. The quiet landscape gives little indication that this small island once became one of the most important centers of learning, religion, and culture in the medieval world. It was here, during the 6th century, that Saint Columba established a monastery that would influence Scotland, Ireland, and parts of northern Britain for centuries. Born around AD 521 in the region of modern Ireland, Columba came from a powerful Gaelic family and became one of the most significant Christian missionaries of his era. According to traditional accounts, he left Ireland after dispute and traveled across the sea with a group of followers, eventually arriving on Iona around AD 563. From this remote location, he created a religious community that would become famous for copying manuscripts, preserving knowledge, and spreading Christianity throughout the region. Columba's influence extended far beyond the small island where his monastery was built. His followers established churches and monasteries across Scotland and northern Britain. The community at Iona became associated with scholarship, artistic achievement, and spiritual authority. Manuscripts created by monks connected to this tradition would later become some of the most admired works of early medieval art, including the famous illuminated manuscripts that preserved religious texts through extraordinary craftsmanship. Yet, alongside Columba's spiritual legacy, grew another tradition: the belief that physical objects connected to the saint possessed special significance. Relics played a central role in medieval Christianity. The remains of saints, personal belongings, and objects associated with their lives were often preserved as symbols of faith. Churches competed to possess such treasures because relics could transform a monastery into a major pilgrimage destination, attracting visitors, donations, and political influence. Saint Columba was no exception. Medieval sources describe several objects associated with him, including manuscripts, clothing, personal items, and sacred remains. Among the most famous was the Cathach, an ancient copy of the Psalms traditionally linked to Columba himself. Although scholars debate the exact circumstances of its creation, it remains one of Ireland's oldest surviving manuscripts and a powerful symbol of the saint's connection with early Christian scholarship. But many other objects attributed to Columba have disappeared. The reasons are connected to the turbulent history of the region. For centuries, Iona stood as a spiritual center, but its location also made it vulnerable. Situated along important sea routes, the monastery attracted attention from Viking raiders beginning in the late 8th century. Repeated attacks forced the community to protect its treasures, relocate valuable objects, and eventually reduce its presence on the island. During these centuries of disruption, countless relics and manuscripts were moved, hidden, damaged, or lost. One of the greatest mysteries concerns the fate of Columba's burial place and physical remains. Medieval traditions claimed that his body was preserved and later moved to protect it from danger. Some accounts suggest his remains were divided between different locations, while others describe secret transfers during periods of conflict. Because written sources often blend historical events with religious tradition, determining exactly what happened remains extremely difficult. Could some of Columba's relics still exist today, hidden in forgotten locations? The possibility cannot be completely dismissed. Throughout European history, religious communities frequently concealed valuable objects during invasions or political upheaval. Monks sometimes buried treasures beneath churches, transferred relics to safer monasteries, or disguised their locations to prevent destruction. In several cases, objects believed lost for centuries have unexpectedly resurfaced after being discovered in old collections or archaeological excavations. Some researchers have suggested that unidentified relics preserved in Scottish or Irish churches could potentially have connections to early medieval saints. However, proving such links is extremely challenging. Many objects from this period lack detailed records, and traditions surrounding relics often developed long after the original events. The mystery becomes even more complicated when considering the legendary items associated with Columba. Some medieval traditions speak of powerful books, staffs, bells, and other sacred objects connected to his life. The Breac Maedoc, the Book of Kells, and other famous manuscripts have sometimes been linked in popular imagination to the world of Columba's followers, although direct connections are often uncertain. These associations reflect the enormous cultural influence of Iona's tradition rather than confirmed ownership. More speculative theories imagine that some of Columba's lost treasures may remain concealed beneath the landscape of Iona itself, or within forgotten monastic sites throughout the British Isles. Hidden chambers, abandoned religious foundations, and unexplored archaeological layers continue to inspire curiosity, though no discovery has confirmed these possibilities. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not only where the relics went, but how much of Columba's world disappeared with them. The early medieval period was an age when objects carried stories. A manuscript was not simply a collection of written pages. A bell was not merely metal. A staff was not just wood. These objects connected communities to their founders, their beliefs, and their memories. Losing them meant losing pieces of identity. The surviving remains of Iona offer only fragments of a much larger story. The stones, crosses, and manuscripts that remain provide evidence of a vibrant intellectual and spiritual tradition, but they also reveal the enormous gaps left by centuries of change. Somewhere, perhaps inside an overlooked collection, beneath the foundations of an ancient building, or lost forever beneath the passing of time, pieces of Columba's legacy may still survive. The lost relics of St. Columba remain another unanswered chapter from the early medieval world, a reminder that history is shaped not only by what humanity preserves, but also by the countless treasures, writings, and memories that quietly disappear before they can ever be found. As the lost relics of St. Columba reveal how easily sacred objects can disappear from human memory, another mystery emerges from the royal courts of early medieval Europe. This time, the search leads to the world of the Franks, a powerful kingdom that rose from the remains of the Western Roman Empire and transformed the future of the continent. Their kings commanded armies, controlled vast territories, and surrounded themselves with objects designed to represent divine favor, royal authority, and unimaginable wealth. Yet, many of these treasures have vanished, not destroyed in a single dramatic moment, not recorded in a final inventory, but gradually removed from history through wars, political changes, theft, and the slow erosion of memory. The Frankish royal treasures remain one of the great, unanswered questions of early medieval Europe. A mystery hidden not only beneath the ground, but within the missing pages of history itself. Across the fields of modern France and Belgium, quiet landscapes conceal the remains of an age when royal courts moved between fortified settlements, monasteries, and ancient Roman cities. Beneath these lands lie traces of palaces, burial grounds, and forgotten roads once traveled by Frankish rulers. The soil has preserved fragments of their world, broken weapons, pieces of jewelry, coins, and ceremonial objects. Yet these discoveries represent only a small glimpse of what once existed. The wealth of the Frankish kings was far greater than what survives today. During the 5th and 6th centuries AD, the Merovingian dynasty emerged as one of the most influential powers in Western Europe. Their rise began during a period of enormous transformation, when Roman political structures were collapsing and new kingdoms were forming across the former imperial territories. At the center of this transition was Clovis I. Through military campaigns, alliances, and political strategy, Clovis united many Frankish groups under his rule and expanded his influence across much of Gaul. His conversion to Christianity around the end of the 5th century created a powerful relationship between the Frankish monarchy and the Church, giving his dynasty a new source of legitimacy. With power came symbols. The Frankish kings possessed ceremonial weapons decorated with precious metals, elaborate clothing, crowns, rings, and objects used during religious and political ceremonies. These items were not simply expressions of luxury. In the medieval world, royal objects carried meaning. A sword represented military authority. A crown represented divine approval. A golden ornament demonstrated connection to wealth, tradition, and power. But the historical record contains only fragments of this magnificent collection. One of the most important discoveries connected to Frankish royalty occurred in 1653 near the modern city of Tournai in Belgium. Workers uncovered an extraordinary burial believed to belong to Childeric I, the father of Clovis. Inside the grave was a remarkable collection of objects. Archaeologists discovered a golden signet ring depicting the king, weapons, coins, jewelry, and hundreds of small gold decorations. Among the most famous finds were several golden ornaments shaped like insects, which may have once decorated royal clothing or ceremonial equipment. The discovery provided an extraordinary window into the world of the early Franks. For historians, the tomb answered some questions while creating many others. It revealed the sophistication of Merovingian craftsmanship and the connection between Frankish rulers and Roman traditions. Yet it also raised a much larger mystery. If one royal burial contained such extraordinary wealth, how much more existed beyond the archaeological record? The fate of the Childeric treasure itself demonstrates how fragile historical objects can be. After its discovery, the collection was transported to Paris and eventually became part of the royal collections of France. The artifacts attracted scholars and visitors who recognized their importance as evidence of Europe's early medieval past. Then, in 1831, the collection was stolen. Thieves broke into the storage area where the objects were kept and escaped with many of the treasures. Some items were later recovered from a river, but many others disappeared forever. Precious metals were likely melted down, destroying objects that had survived for more than a millennium. This single event became a symbol of a much larger pattern. Throughout history, royal treasures have often been vulnerable precisely because they were valuable. Gold and silver could be transformed into currency. Gemstones could be removed and sold separately. Objects created to represent power could become nothing more than raw materials during times of crisis. The Frankish treasures faced centuries of such dangers. The Merovingian kingdoms were rarely peaceful. Rival royal families competed for territory, and succession disputes frequently led to conflict. Unlike modern states with stable institutions, early medieval kingdoms depended heavily on personal loyalty and the authority of individual rulers. When a king died, his possessions could be divided among heirs, transferred to allies, or seized by enemies. Some treasures may have traveled across Europe during these struggles, changing owners repeatedly until their origins were forgotten. Others may have been hidden. Historical records occasionally mention rulers concealing valuable possessions during periods of invasion or political uncertainty. A royal family facing defeat might bury its wealth rather than allow enemies to capture it. Monasteries often served as places of protection because religious institutions were sometimes respected even during warfare. Could undiscovered Frankish treasures still exist beneath the landscapes of Europe? It is possible. Archaeologists continue to discover elite burials containing objects that had remained untouched for centuries. In recent decades, excavations have revealed remarkable Merovingian graves filled with weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial items. These discoveries show that the archaeological record still holds surprises. However, the most famous treasures may not be waiting inside graves. Some historians believe many royal objects disappeared through reuse. A gold crown could be melted and transformed into another object. A decorated sword could be broken apart for valuable materials. A ceremonial item might survive physically but lose its original identity after passing through different hands. In this sense, the lost treasures of the Franks may not have vanished completely. Their materials may still exist, scattered and transformed into objects whose origins are no longer recognizable. The transition from the Merovingian dynasty to the Carolingian dynasty created another period of uncertainty. When Charlemagne and his family rose to power during the 8th century, they replaced the old royal order with a new vision of empire. The Carolingians sought to connect themselves with Rome, Christianity, and classical traditions. During this transformation, older Merovingian symbols may have been preserved, reinterpreted, or deliberately discarded. What happened to the treasures of the earlier kings? Some may have entered new royal collections. Others may have been hidden, forgotten, or destroyed. The absence of detailed records makes it almost impossible to reconstruct their journey. Among the most intriguing possibilities are lost royal archives and inventories. Medieval rulers sometimes maintained lists of important objects, but many such documents have disappeared. A single surviving inventory could potentially reveal the existence of treasures that historians today do not even know existed. More speculative traditions describe hidden chambers containing Frankish royal objects protected from invaders and political rivals. Legends across France and neighboring regions tell stories of buried gold, lost crowns, and forgotten royal weapons. While such accounts cannot be confirmed, they reflect a historical reality. Powerful rulers did possess valuable objects, and some of them certainly disappeared. The mystery also extends beyond gold and jewels. The Franks inherited aspects of Roman culture while creating something entirely new. Their treasures represented a world in transition, a bridge between the ancient and medieval eras. Every missing artifact represents more than a lost object. It represents a missing piece of how early Europe understood kingship, religion, art, and identity. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that we know the treasures existed. Written sources, archaeological discoveries, and surviving fragments all prove that Frankish kings surrounded themselves with remarkable objects. Yet, the majority of these treasures have disappeared, leaving behind only traces and questions. Some may rest beneath fields that have never been excavated. Some may survive inside private collections, their origins unknown. Some may have been destroyed centuries ago, leaving only descriptions and forgotten texts. As the mystery of the Frankish royal treasures reveals how entire worlds can disappear beneath layers of time, another forgotten chapter emerges from the far northern landscapes of Europe. Here, the missing treasures are not crowns, jewels, or royal symbols, but sacred places where generations once gathered to honor ancient gods. Across Scandinavia, forests, valleys, and coastal settlements once held temples dedicated to Odin, Thor, Freyr, and countless other deities. Yet many of these places vanished almost completely, leaving behind only fragments, written descriptions, and unanswered questions. Along the shores of ancient Scandinavia, where dark forests meet cold seas and mountains rise beneath endless northern skies, the landscape appears almost unchanged from centuries ago. Mist moves between pine trees, rivers cut through valleys, and isolated fields stretch across lands once controlled by powerful chieftains. Beneath this quiet scenery lie the remains of a world that existed before Christianity transformed the region. A world of sacred groves, ceremonial halls, carved idols, and mysterious rituals. But where are the temples? Unlike the great stone sanctuaries of Greece, Rome, and Egypt, most Scandinavian pagan temples left behind little visible evidence. Many were built from wood, a material vulnerable to fire, decay, and centuries of environmental change. Others may have been deliberately destroyed during the spread of Christianity, their locations forgotten as new religious centers replaced older sacred spaces. The disappearance of these temples represents one of the most intriguing archaeological mysteries of Northern Europe. For centuries before Christianization, Norse communities practiced a complex belief system centered around a wide collection of gods and supernatural beings. Odin was associated with wisdom, war, and knowledge. Thor represented strength and protection. Freyr was connected with fertility, prosperity, and peace. These beliefs were not organized around a single universal institution, but instead existed through local traditions, regional customs, and communities led by powerful families and religious figures. Sacred spaces were therefore not always massive monuments. Some may have been simple wooden buildings located near settlements. Others may have been natural locations such as forests, springs, mountains, or islands considered connected to divine forces. Rituals could take place outdoors, making archaeological identification extremely difficult. Yet, written sources describe places of remarkable importance. One of the most famous accounts comes from the German chronicler Adam of Bremen, who wrote in the 11th century about a major temple at Uppsala in Sweden. According to his description, a magnificent sanctuary stood there containing images of Odin, Thor, and Freyr. He claimed that the temple was decorated with gold and served as a central location for religious ceremonies. If Adam's description is accurate, Uppsala would have been one of the most significant pagan centers in Scandinavia. But the physical remains remain debated. Archaeological excavations around Old Uppsala have revealed evidence of enormous ceremonial halls, elite residences, and large burial mounds. These discoveries demonstrate that the area was a place of extraordinary importance for centuries. However, identifying a specific structure as the exact temple described by Adam of Bremen remains difficult. Was the famous temple destroyed after Christianization? Was it transformed into another building? Or did later generations simply forget its location? The uncertainty surrounding Uppsala reflects a much broader problem. The transition from paganism to Christianity occurred gradually between approximately the 8th and 12th centuries. Missionaries traveled through Scandinavia, kings adopted Christianity for political and diplomatic reasons, and new religious institutions gradually replaced older traditions. During this transformation, pagan temples became symbols of the previous belief system. Some were abandoned naturally as communities changed their practices. Others may have been dismantled intentionally. Historical sources describe the destruction of idols and sacred sites, particularly during periods when Christian rulers sought to strengthen their authority. However, the archaeological evidence is often incomplete. A wooden temple could disappear within generations. A sacred building might be dismantled and its materials reused elsewhere. A religious site could continue functioning under a different name, hiding its original purpose from future generations. This creates one of the greatest challenges for researchers today. How do you identify a lost temple when the people who built it left few written records? Unlike Christian churches, which often contained inscriptions, architectural plans, and continuous institutional traditions, pagan sacred spaces were rarely documented in the same way. Much of what is known comes from later sources written after Christianity had already become dominant. This raises questions about how accurately these accounts describe earlier beliefs. Were medieval writers preserving genuine memories of pagan temples? Or were they describing older traditions through the perspective of a new religious world? One of the most fascinating examples is the discovery of ritual buildings at archaeological sites throughout Scandinavia. At several locations in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, archaeologists have uncovered structures that appear to have served ceremonial purposes. These buildings often differ from ordinary houses. They contain unusual layouts, traces of animal sacrifice, special deposits, and objects suggesting religious activity. At sites such as Borg in Norway and Upokra in Sweden, researchers have discovered evidence of long-term ritual activity lasting for centuries. Upokra, in particular, has produced remarkable finds, including decorated weapons, jewelry, and signs of repeated ceremonies. Some scholars believe it may have been one of the most important religious and political centers in ancient Scandinavia. Yet, even here, mysteries remain. Was Upokra a temple complex, a royal center, a place where political power and religion existed together? The answer may never be completely certain. Another mystery surrounds the possible locations of smaller local temples. Scandinavian society was organized around farms, clans, and regional leaders. Not every community would have possessed a grand sanctuary. Many religious activities may have taken place in smaller buildings that left almost no trace. A simple wooden hall used for ceremonies could disappear completely after abandonment. This means countless sacred sites may still remain unidentified. Modern archaeological technology has begun changing the search. Ground-penetrating radar, aerial surveys, and advanced landscape analysis allow researchers to identify buried structures without extensive excavation. These methods have revealed traces of ancient buildings, post holes, and unusual formations that may point toward forgotten ritual spaces. Every discovery raises new possibilities. Could there be dozens, perhaps hundreds, of lost temples hidden beneath modern towns, farmland, and forests? Some researchers believe the answer may be yes. The landscape of Scandinavia has been continuously occupied for thousands of years. Farms expanded over older settlements. Roads crossed ancient gathering places. New buildings replaced older structures. In many cases, the physical evidence of pagan worship may now exist beneath places where people live today without knowing what once stood there. The mystery also extends to the objects used inside these temples. Historical sources mention statues of gods, sacred weapons, ceremonial vessels, and other religious items. Yet very few large pagan idols have survived. Most wooden figures would have decayed, while metal objects may have been melted down or removed. What happened to these sacred objects? Some may have been destroyed during religious conflicts. Others may have been hidden by communities trying to protect their traditions. A few may still survive underground. Occasionally, archaeology produces discoveries that offer glimpses into this vanished world. Wooden carvings preserved in unusual conditions, ritual objects found in wetlands, and ceremonial deposits buried in fields have revealed details that written sources never recorded. These discoveries suggest that the world of Norse paganism was far more complex than simple legends of warriors and gods. It was a living religious system connected to agriculture, kingship, nature, ancestry, and community identity. More speculative traditions imagine that some major temples were intentionally concealed before Christianity became dominant. According to certain legends, religious communities hid sacred objects and protected ancient knowledge in remote locations. While such stories cannot be verified, they reflect a historical possibility. During times of cultural transformation, people often attempted to preserve what they feared losing. The disappearance of these temples may therefore have been both physical and symbolic. A building can be destroyed, but the memory of a sacred place can survive for centuries through stories, traditions, and landscapes. Many Scandinavian place names still preserve echoes of older beliefs. Names connected to gods, rituals, and sacred locations appear throughout the region, suggesting that the ancient religious world did not disappear completely. It transformed. Perhaps the greatest mystery is how much remains hidden beneath the modern landscape. The Vikings and their ancestors left behind remarkable ships, weapons, settlements, and artwork. Yet their sacred spaces remain far more difficult to find. The temples where communities gathered, where offerings were made, and where people sought connection with their gods have largely disappeared from view. Some may have been destroyed. Some may have been forgotten. Others may still wait beneath the soil, untouched for centuries. Deep within the forests, beneath fields, or near ancient coastal settlements, traces of Scandinavia's pagan past may still remain. A buried foundation, a forgotten artifact, or a hidden ceremonial site could one day reveal another piece of this lost world. Until then, the missing temples of Scandinavia remain one of history's quiet mysteries, a reminder that civilizations are not only remembered through what they build, but also through the sacred places that vanish when beliefs, cultures, and generations change. As the lost pagan temples of Scandinavia reveal how entire belief systems can disappear beneath the changing landscapes of history, another mystery emerges from the misty shores of the western British Isles. Here, the missing pieces are not sacred buildings or forgotten rituals, but the origins of a kingdom that helped shape medieval Scotland and Ireland. The founders of Riata left behind a legacy of kings, warriors, and missionaries. Yet, the earliest chapters of their story remain wrapped in uncertainty. Along the western coast of Scotland, where mountains rise sharply from deep waters and islands appear like shadows beneath the Atlantic sky, the landscape still carries echoes of an ancient world. The shores of Argyll, the islands of the Inner Hebrides, and the northeastern coast of Ireland were once connected by sea routes traveled by merchants, monks, and warriors. Long before modern borders divided these regions, the sea served as a pathway rather than a barrier. Among the communities that mastered this maritime world were the people of Riata. Their kingdom emerged during the early medieval period, becoming one of the most influential Gaelic powers in Western Britain. From their territories in modern western Scotland and parts of northeastern Ireland, their rulers controlled important coastal routes, built alliances, fought rivals, and eventually contributed to the rise of the kingdom that would become Scotland. Yet, the beginnings of Riata remain one of the most debated mysteries of early medieval history. Who founded the kingdom? Where did its ruling families truly come from? And how much of the traditional story reflects historical events rather than later legends created to explain political power? The surviving evidence provides only fragments. Much of what is known about Riata comes from later medieval sources, especially genealogies and chronicles written centuries after the kingdom's emergence. These texts describe legendary ancestors, royal bloodlines, and heroic founders, but separating historical memory from political storytelling is extremely difficult. According to traditional accounts, the origins of Riata were connected to a figure named Fergus Mór mac Irc. Medieval genealogies present Fergus as one of the early kings who led a migration from Ireland into western Scotland during the 5th century AD. Later traditions describe him and his descendants as the founders of a new Gaelic kingdom across the sea. For centuries, this story was accepted as a straightforward account of migration and conquest, but modern historians have questioned many aspects of it. Was Riata truly founded by a large migration from Ireland? Or did the kingdom develop from communities that had already lived in western Scotland for generations? The answer remains uncertain. The western regions of Scotland and Ireland had long shared cultural connections. Gaelic languages, religious traditions, artistic styles, and trade networks crossed the sea between these lands. Movement between Ireland and Scotland was not unusual, meaning that the emergence of Riata may have been less a dramatic invasion and more the result of gradual cultural and political development. The traditional founder's story may have served another purpose. Medieval kingdoms often created origin legends to strengthen their legitimacy. A ruling family connected to a heroic ancestor could claim a stronger right to power. By tracing their lineage to legendary figures, kings transformed political authority into something that appeared ancient and inevitable. This does not mean the stories were entirely fictional. They may preserve memories of real individuals, migrations, or conflicts that were reshaped over generations. The challenge is determining which parts reflect actual events and which parts were added later. Archaeology provides some clues. Across western Scotland, researchers have discovered evidence of early medieval settlements, fortified sites, churches, and burial grounds connected with the period when Riata emerged. Places such as Dunad, located in Argyll, are especially important. Rising above the surrounding landscape, this ancient hill fort is widely associated with the rulers of Dal Riata. Dunad contains evidence of long-term occupation and political importance. A carved footprint found at the site has often been interpreted as part of a royal inauguration ceremony, where new rulers may have symbolically placed their foot into the stone while claiming authority over the kingdom. Nearby discoveries of tools, weapons, and imported goods suggest that Dunad was not merely a settlement, but a center of power. Yet even Dunad does not reveal the full story. The identity of the earliest rulers remains uncertain. The names of several early kings appear in later records, but the reliability of these lists is debated. Some may represent genuine historical figures. Others may have been created or rearranged to provide a continuous royal lineage extending deep into the past. The problem is common throughout early medieval Europe. When written records are scarce, genealogies become both sources of information and instruments of political memory. Dal Riata's disappearance is equally mysterious. For several centuries, the kingdom played a major role in Western Britain. Its rulers interacted with neighboring peoples, including the Picts of northern Scotland, the Britons of Strathclyde, and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms further south. It also became closely connected with the spread of Christianity through figures such as Saint Columba, whose monastery on Iona became one of the most important religious centers of the medieval world. Yet, by the 9th century, Dal Riata, as a separate political entity, had largely faded. It was not destroyed in a single dramatic event. There was no final battle that ended the kingdom. Instead, it appears to have gradually merged into a larger political identity. The rise of the Kingdom of Alba, which eventually became Scotland, absorbed many traditions and territories associated with Dal Riata. The descendants of its rulers continued to influence Scottish kingship, but the original kingdom disappeared as a distinct entity. This gradual transformation creates another historical puzzle. Did Dal Riata truly vanish, or did it simply become something new? Political identities in the early medieval world were often fluid. A kingdom could disappear as a name while its people, traditions, and ruling families continued. The boundaries between one society and another were not always clear. Perhaps Dal Riata's greatest mystery is not its disappearance, but its transformation. The founders of the kingdom remain especially difficult to understand because they existed during a period when written history was limited. The people who created the foundations of this maritime power left behind few direct records. Their voices survive mainly through later accounts written by others. What did they actually experience? Did they arrive as settlers from Ireland, gradually expand their influence, or emerge from older communities already established along Scotland's western coast? Different historians have offered different interpretations. Some emphasize linguistic and cultural evidence suggesting strong Irish connections. The Gaelic language and traditions of Dal Riata clearly linked it with Ireland, and movement across the Irish Sea was a normal part of life in the region. Others argue that the relationship was more complex. They suggest that Dal Riata may have developed through interaction between multiple communities rather than through a single founding migration. The kingdom's identity may have been created through alliances, trade, and shared culture rather than conquest alone. More speculative theories have pushed the origins even further into uncertainty. Some traditions suggest that the founders of Dal Riata descended from ancient royal lines stretching back into legendary Irish history. Others have searched for connections between early Gaelic kingdoms and forgotten groups mentioned in older sources. While these ideas remain difficult to prove, they demonstrate how powerful the mystery of Dal Riata's origins continues to be. The physical landscape also preserves unanswered questions. Across the western islands and coastal regions, countless archaeological sites remain only partially explored. Ancient settlements lie beneath later buildings. Burial sites remain undiscovered. Objects buried for more than 1,000 years may still wait beneath the ground. Each discovery has the potential to reshape understanding of the kingdom's beginnings. A single inscription, a royal burial, or an overlooked artifact could provide evidence about the people who established Dal Riata and the world they inhabited. The mystery also connects with the broader story of early medieval Europe. The centuries after the fall of Rome were not simply an age of decline, they were a period of transformation, where new kingdoms formed from older traditions. Peoples moved, languages changed, and identities evolved. Dal Riata represents one example of how complex this transformation could be. Its founders stood between worlds. They lived in a landscape where Roman influence was fading, Gaelic traditions were expanding, Christianity was spreading, and new political structures were emerging. Their kingdom became a bridge between Ireland and Scotland, between the ancient world and the medieval age. Yet the individuals who began this story remain almost invisible. Their names may survive only through later traditions. Their achievements may be remembered through monuments whose original meanings are uncertain. Their journeys across the sea may never be fully reconstructed. Perhaps somewhere beneath the hills of Argol, within the ruins of an ancient settlement, or inside an undiscovered manuscript, more answers remain hidden. The disappearance of Dal Riata's founders is not only a mystery about where they came from. It is a reminder of how much of the early medieval world was built by people whose lives were never fully recorded. Their kingdom shaped the future of Scotland, yet the first voices behind that transformation have almost disappeared into silence. And somewhere between legend and history, between Ireland and Scotland, between what was written and what was forgotten, the true story of Dal Riata's beginnings continues to wait.